this is Megan with Believe in the Run.
And this is Megan with Featherstone Nutrition.
And you're listening to Fuel for the Soul, the podcast where we talk all things hydration and nutrition and how it affects performance. And today is our third episode of a series where we are talking all about disordered eating. And today the focus is going to be RED-S and running.
And we have our special guest back with us, dietitian Lindsay Romas. So she is here to add her insight. So I'll let her chat a little about herself.
Yeah. Thank you guys again for having me today. I'm excited to be a part of this series. I just want to share with people, I've been in the eating disorder field for nearly 10 years now, and more recently started my own private practice, Fulfilled Nutrition Counseling. So I've worked with children, adolescents, and adults. I've worked in every level of care. So I'm excited to be here just to shed any light or shed any knowledge on some of these great questions that a lot of your listeners have.
Eating Recovery Center, ERC, is a leading mental health care system dedicated to the treatment of eating disorders and co-occurring conditions. ERC provides expert, multidisciplinary care teams that utilize innovative and evidence-based treatment programs to offer healing and hope for a lasting recovery in individuals and their families who are suffering with an eating disorder. ERC's treatment programs are located across the nation in several states, offering in-person and virtual treatment options. They offer a full continuum of care model to meet individuals where they are at on their journey to recovery. ERC treats patients of all ages, body shapes, sizes, races, ethnicities, religions, sexual identities, gender identities, and expressions. For more information, please visit eatingrecoverycenter.com and check out the show notes for more information. Episode 1, we talked more about if we've had a history of disordered eating or an eating disorder, and now we're running. Episode 2, we talked about disordered thoughts and kind of how to work through some of those. And then now, as Meg said, we are going to tackle RED-S and running. So if you are unfamiliar, RED-S is Relative Energy Deficiency in sport. It was formerly the female athlete triad, but we know that men can also suffer from underfueling. And we also know that the triad used to be just like 3 different factors that were part of it. And we really know like every single body operation is affected by underfueling. So it's a much more holistic, bigger approach into the impact that underfueling can have on us as athletes. So in particular, it's looking at reproductive function. So maybe that's amenorrhea for females or low testosterone for males, decreased immunity, so seeing more incidents of illness throughout a training cycle, decreased strength and power, decreased cardiovascular function. So if we all pride ourselves on that low heart rate, but when we see it drop too low, that's a concern that we are perhaps, not fueling our body well. When we have sleep disturbances, also the mental health impact of underfueling is huge. So that's a piece of the whole RED-S discussion. We also may see impaired blood sugar levels and lipid levels. We may actually see them increase in some athletes that aren't fueling well enough because of the stress response of underfueling. We may see impaired blood values. So that low ferritin could be that we're losing iron and not getting enough in, but chronically seeing that low ferritin is often associated with underfueling. And then also we see impaired energy metabolism. So our just baseline metabolism can change. We see poor GI function. So if we're having a lot of GI issues on our runs and changing nutrition and habits isn't touching them, this could be a symptom of just underfueling. And then also impaired bone health. So we know that, stress reactions, stress fractures, all of those things can be related to, poor nutrition or lack of nutrition. So all the questions today from you all are going to revolve around RED-S. The one thing I wanted to chat about before we get into the questions and have Lindsay kind of weigh in on some of these things too was they did do a research study at the Boston Marathon, and it was looking at low energy availability in people who were running the Boston Marathon. And so you may have heard of low energy availability, you've heard of RED-S. So they can technically be 2 separate different things, right? We could start to have some low energy availability, which means we're not consuming enough energy to support our daily functions of life and running and on top of it. So we could have like a spurt of intentional or unintentional low energy availability that doesn't develop all the way into RED-S. But we do know that it's a huge risk factor of getting there. So this study at the Boston Marathon was particularly on the low energy availability, and it found that 42.5% of females had low energy availability who finished, and 17.6% of the males who finished had low energy availability. So then they took that a step further to look into how they raced, how their training cycle went, how things went after the race, and they found that there was an increased risk of injury, illness, and twice the risk of needing medical care during the race in this specific population. So not only is it crummy for our overall health and longevity, but we also know that it has a direct impact on our performance. So I know we all kind of resonate with different aspects of all of this. So it's kind of interesting to look at it, from both of those perspectives.
Were you shocked by those numbers? Those seem really high.
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually was. I kind of, if I had to guess, I would have said more like a third of females and
Sure.
a fourth of males. So males were actually a little less than I would have expected. I would have expected males to be just a little bit higher than that, and maybe females to be lower. But yeah, that's a huge percentage of finishers. Yeah.
I'm curious about that. I didn't hear that study, and that's really powerful. I think one of the things I sometimes see in the female population compared to the male population is the differences in like ideal body. And I think sometimes for females, society views like thinness as the ideal body, and then males, ideal body type might be like muscular. And I think there's a phrase called like bigorexia, meaning like individuals are trying to be more muscular. So I wonder if like that is part of the equation for them, just like thinking through that of like somebody's trying to gain muscle versus if somebody is trying to be more thin. I don't know. I'm just like very curious about that. That's a really cool study, and I think sheds a lot of light on that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, let's get into our first listener question. This is from Jeanette Smith. She said, love the pod. For women, is a regular menstrual cycle a reliable indicator if we are fueling enough/correctly? Personal backstory, I'm 28 days on the money, but I'm currently recovering from what I think was just overtraining, but the symptoms are a little like REDS. I'm really intentional about fueling, so I think I'm doing it right and hoping my consistent cycle is the proof.
Yeah. So we hear this a lot, right? Like if you're getting your normal cycle, that's great. That's wonderful. I still hear people whose providers are telling them, oh, it's okay that you're not getting your cycle. That happens with women runners. Or, oh, are you getting 4 cycles a year? Oh, that's fine. That's all you need. So we still, unfortunately, have a long way to go of people realizing that a regular menstrual cycle is a huge indicator that we're doing things right, right? But that being said, there certainly could be some hormonal changes happening in the background with a little bit of underfueling. And we can still get our cycle, right? Like we see that there's an increased risk of anovulatory, so AKA not ovulating, if we're underfueling, but yet still getting the same cycle. We also see shortening of the luteal phase, the second half of our cycle when we're underfueling. So there can certainly be slight alterations in our cycle related to a little bit of underfueling. Obviously, if it's a large mismatch, like a large low energy availability for a prolonged period of time, that's where we're going to see the cycle disturbance a little more quickly, right? But there could, I think, Jeanette, yes, that's wonderful that you're still getting it. There could still be some slight things going on, right? It's not like foolproof. Like I'm getting my cycle, I'm perfect, right? I'm eating great, meeting my nutrition needs. There could be some discrepancies there. But that is still, a really good sign that things are going well.
Yeah, and I would just supplement to what you said, Megan. I think it could also be worthwhile if you're noticing a slight disruption in your period. I think it can just be worthwhile to take some time to evaluate the nutrition composition. So, like, what do the carbs look like? What do the proteins look like? What do the fats look like, too? And just kind of review that and look at that and seeing if any minor tweaks can really help support your body and have that continuous regular cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great as well. And then too, I think what's normal for each person, right? So we know that a normal cycle could be, I think it's 24 to 34 days, something in that range. But what's normal for us, right? Like if we see it bumping like a week in either direction, and we've talked about this on the show before, like those would be signs of like, is something going on here? And unfortunately, as she mentioned, training more than our body is used to, but fueling it well enough could also cause some disturbances, and stress. So stress can cause all sorts of disturbances to our cycle and overall health. And sometimes we run to get rid of our stress and forget that that's not the only way that we manage our stress. So, that could certainly be a piece of it too. But I think it's good that she's noticing it and noticing that she saw some of these signs of reds, which that's helpful to know that the message is out there and that people are thinking about some of these symptoms that we talked about at the beginning. And I think if we're questioning that, that's always a good time to assess, right? Is our nutrition okay? See that primary care provider, see our OBGYN, and just get that medical care team around us just to make sure that we're, doing the best by our body.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Our next question is from Tammy. She said, "Hi there. My daughter has REDS. She's a college swimmer. She has had her nutrition back under control for about 18 months. However, she is complaining of constant fatigue and even needed an iron infusion 18 months ago due to low iron levels, even after supplementation. We are curious if there is any research showing long-term iron levels in athletes recovering from REDS."
This is a tough one because we do know that that is very closely linked, but not always the cause, right? As with all of this, like there could be other causes related to a low ferritin, but we do know that there's a connection here. And we also know that Tammy's daughter had a history of REDS. So I think it's logical for her to be a little bit concerned, about like, is this all related? And we do, as we mentioned at the beginning, know that a persistent low ferritin, even with supplementation, when we know we have a healthy functioning GI tract, no celiac, nothing like that, is a red flag, right? Like if we're supplementing appropriately with the right dose and the right timing and it's not changing, something, needs looked into a little bit further. So the fact that she needs that iron infusion, makes you wonder if there's still some underfueling going on. But to her point, and maybe this is something you can weigh in, Lindsay, is like recovery takes a long time. So maybe you could kind of give a little bit of a timeline for somebody who has been underfueling, whether intentionally or not. And like when we start to see some of those normal reproductive functions come back, iron responding a little bit better, absorption of certain micronutrients, from your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's, again, there's no like black and white answer of what that will look like. I think one thing I will share is that when somebody is, diagnosed with an eating disorder or disordered eating, they say sometimes it may take at minimum 1 year of treatment to recover from like the psychological end of it, but also that tends to correspond with the nutritional rehab element of it. So I think it just varies from individual to individual. And so I think, as you had mentioned, just like kind of checking back in, how is our nutrition looking? How are we doing with that? I think one thing that I will just share is that I do see a higher prevalence of individuals who are either in swim, gymnastics, or dance, that because of the like leotards and or other factors, we do see a higher prevalence of disordered eating or eating disorders, which then can also lead to like weight suppression. And I've seen some individuals who maybe they don't start their period until they're 18, 19, because they've been a swimmer their whole life or they've been in dance their whole life, and their weight was suppressed for so long. And when we look at those growth curves, we can kind of see that they've plateaued, whereas we know a female, going through menarche should start to increase on that growth chart. So sometimes we kind of look back at like, does this individual need to restore weight through proper renourishment as well? So I think it could be worthwhile taking a look at that, and just kind of exploring that. And I think sometimes those are some small things that can be missed here and there, but I think it can be worthwhile because once we can get to that appropriate weight for each individual, that's where the body is really going to thrive and do well, and then can help reverse, some of those nutrition deficits.
That is a really great point of the change that our body is supposed to go through as a female, right? And if this person's a collegiate swimmer, they've probably been swimming for a very, very long time. So it's possible, right, that this could have gone back a little bit longer than maybe anyone realized. And then that would take even longer to recover from. Yeah, that's a very good point.
All right, our next question is from KC. They said, I spent most of my adult life running way underfueled and likely in full-blown reds, toggling through bone stress injuries, poor performance, amenorrhea, autoimmune issues, etc. At age 47, I got a pretty gruesome longitudinal split through my entire peroneal tendon and was told my running days were officially done. In full pissed off state, I attacked it like a scientist. My MS is exercise viz, endured months of PT and strength training, and very, very slowly worked my way back to not only running, but running marathons again. Along the way, I started to eat a lot more, including adding more carbs. Why are carbs so scary? Gained almost 10 pounds, and this past summer actually ran several PBs in the mile, the 5K, and the 10-mile distance. Now, a few months away from my 50th birthday and officially on, quote, the other side of menopause, I still struggle with how to fuel. I actually out-eat my teenage sons most days, but somehow I'm still always hungry. I feel like when I get close to the recommended carbs per day, and primarily when I fuel during runs, I'm hungrier than on the days when I prioritize protein. Why?
Well, we know protein keeps us fuller longer than simple carbs, so there could be a piece of that. But I'm curious, Lindsay, your thought on if someone was coming to you and saying, I think I'm doing the right thing, but I'm still always hungry, what would your response be?
I would say listen to your body. I think a lot of what we see in society is kind of pushing us away from those internalized hunger cues, and we really need to lean in and listen to them. I think, especially for somebody who had shared just like that historical restriction, I think the body, once we start renourishing better, it helps guide us to where we need to be, but it can feel counterintuitive to what we have felt in the past. So it might be like a hard concept to navigate. But I really encourage people to lean in and listen to their body. I think, I know she was mentioning like when she gets close to the recommended carbs per day. I think for me, I come back to like, what is that number that she is going off of? Again, every individual is different. So if she's seeing increased hunger, I think it's important to lean into that and really listen to your body and eat. I think one thing I would also share is trying not to compare to others, just because I think that can also raise question of like, am I eating enough? Am I eating too much? But really honing in and listening to what our body is telling us to do.
Yeah, that's a good one, because I do hear that a lot too. Like I don't want to eat more than my husband. I don't want to be the one ordering this, that, or the other. And it makes me smile because I'm like, I just eat what I want to eat, right? But like if we have these preconceived notions of judging what we're eating against someone else and thinking that we don't deserve what they have because of their size, their activity, whatever it may be, right? I think that's a great recommendation. I always say, keep your eyes on your own plate, right? Like
Yes.
you do you, this is what we got, especially at, dining out or at holidays. Like it doesn't matter what's on anybody else's plate. We don't need to comment on their plates. They don't need to comment on ours. And I think, you've mentioned how hard it can be if we have struggled with an eating disorder to feel hunger and to reconnect with hunger cues. So Casey, let's not lose those hunger cues. And as you're saying, listen to them, honor them, fuel them. And perhaps her perception of what is enough is actually not enough. And that seems to be what her body's telling her.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to your point about the comparison, Megan, like she's training for marathons and she's comparing herself to her teenage sons, but they might be, sitting around most days and they might not play sports or be as active as she is. So I just feel like, to your point, it's like just focus on fueling for your needs versus comparing to anyone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, our next question is from Celine. She said, big fan of the show and I'm catching up on older episodes. I recently listened to the episode about menstruation where Feathers mentioned that REDS can be caused by going too long in between meals, and I'm wondering more about this. I am 14 months postpartum and still have not had my period. I'm still breastfeeding my daughter and am planning to continue breastfeeding until she's at least 2. She also eats lots of solids. Right now, I only run about 30 to 50 kilometers a week, and I do not think I eat a lot, especially carbs, but there are some days that I don't eat for extended periods, so now I'm wondering if I could be suffering from REDS. As far as other symptoms go, I am tired, have trouble sleeping, and have postpartum depression, but I'm feeling super strong in my running. I've PR'd my 5K, 10K, and half times all this year. and haven't dealt with any injuries, so I'm not sure. I had blood work a few months ago and everything was normal. Does this sound like it could possibly be REDS? Either way, can you recommend some foods and snacks that are good for breastfeeding runners? I am starting training for my first full marathon in the new year, and I really want to ensure I'm getting in enough calories, and I'm hoping to get my period back sooner than later.
There is nothing more of a furnace than a running nursing mom. I mean, those energy needs are absolutely through the roof. I remember when I was in that phase, and I literally just felt like I was eating all day long, and like 2 or 3 times the amount I was eating just running, right? With the nursing on top of it. So it's very possible that even maybe unintentionally, these needs are not being met just because I mean, I was a dietitian at the time, and I was a sports dietitian, and I remember I would eat what to me was significantly larger meal than I was used to eating even when I was pregnant, and I'd be hungry in an hour. Like, how am I possibly hungry already? But that's where the snacks come in, right? So I do think that's a really hard period to nourish our bodies, is when we are getting back into running while we are also creating and feeding another human, right? So that's just a little bit of my own experience, but I am curious, Lindsay, what your thoughts are on all this information.
Yeah, I think too, kind of resonating. I was more recently in a similar situation, sans the running, but I was pumping for my daughter for a year. So shout out to you, Mama, for pumping till year 2. It is kind of like a full time job, or breastfeeding, even, So I think there's, as Megan had said, there's just such a high energy demand. And while I was in that phase, I started to do a lot of research on, what nutrition needs look like. And I think some things I'll name is that, sometimes individuals are really hungry and sometimes they're not. We still need to fuel very consistently throughout the day and choose energy dense foods. So a lot of times it can be valuable to make sure we're getting in sufficient dietary fats with what we're eating, just because it helps pack a punch and holds that like sustainable energy for us. So really eating frequently throughout the day can be really valuable. I know you had mentioned really just struggling, with fatigue, postpartum depression, and trouble sleeping. I do think it can go hand in hand with, being a mom. And I think, that extra energy expenditure can also play a toll on, our needs for nutrition, and our energy levels. So I do think kind of checking back in with your nutritional intake and trying to see how you can increase that, and just making sure that you're getting a good amount of carbs, proteins, and fats throughout the day. And like Megan said, it's just the energy demand is really pretty high, for not only a breastfeeding mom, but also with that energy expenditure with running. So it can feel kind of difficult to match those needs, and there's absolutely different types of foods out there that you can utilize to help get that nutrition in that your body needs.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because she did mention I'm only running 30 to 50 kilometers a week right now. So obviously she's used to running more than that. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe in her mind, I don't
Hindsight.
need that much energy. Why do I feel like this? Right. But
Right.
putting that on top of the demands of
Mm-hmm.
breastfeeding is probably just a little more than she realizes, to be fair. And
Mm-hmm.
I think what you were saying about eating every 2 to 3 hours, I think it sounds like that is a gap for her if she's going too long or worried she's going too long.
Mm-hmm.
And then your advice to create a more energy dense meal or snack is huge, right? So adding more fat into those things, making sure there's more protein in there, having more carbs in there, So if you're used to eating a salad with chicken and some sweet potatoes in it, right? Maybe we also put another grain in there, and we put an avocado and full fat dressing and some cheese, so that it's really dense energy wise, so that
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't feel like she's having to eat constantly, or, and not have to think about it quite as much with running and a new baby.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I did want to share too. I think the piece she had mentioned was just like not getting her period back yet.
Mm.
I would just connect with your OB or gynecologist a little bit more about that, because I know every individual is different, and breastfeeding can kind of halt that period from happening for some individuals, and some people get it back. So it really is just variable. So I would encourage you to kind of reach out to your medical provider on that piece of it. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is more or less of, struggling with that postpartum depression. I think that's a very serious topic, and I hope that that is something that you're getting support for. And one of the things we see and know in the literature is that food is going to be the fundamental building block to produce those appropriate hormones and neurotransmitters in our body. So I do a lot of presentations on like food and mood. So it's going to be very advantageous to make sure we're also feeling well. That can help support you as you're going through that postpartum depression.
Yeah, that's a great tip for sure. Yeah, I think sometimes we forget to connect, and maybe I don't do it justice either on this podcast. We're always talking about how we're fueling our body for running and fueling our body, but to your point, we're fueling our brain, and our brain is what keeps us happy, and there's a connection there. So it's a really, really good add-on.
Absolutely.
I feel like one of the consistent themes throughout all these questions around REDS is like, do I have REDS potentially? And from what I'm hearing is like, or you tell me, is there anything that someone can be like, oh, let me check this box. This means I have it or I don't have it? Or is it more of like a process of like thinking through all of the symptoms and talking to multiple people?
The latter. There's a whole host of symptoms, and as we've noticed, everybody portrays different symptoms when they have something, right? We could all get the exact same cold, and I could have a sore throat, you could have a stuffy nose, and Lindsay could have a headache, right? So it's very similar. There's this whole host of pieces that we know go in, or symptoms that we could recognize as REDS, and then it's getting into a provider to perhaps get the blood work and the more thorough medical examination to actually, for lack of a better term, slap that label on there, right? But there's not, at least in my knowledge, there's not like, if you have 3 of these 10 symptoms, you have REDS. It's a little bit more of a clinical diagnosis. But you're right. That is an undertone of all of these, is people wondering if that's what's going on. And I feel like we're in a day where a lot of folks are shying away a little bit from like standard medical care. And I think this is a reminder that like, they're a huge help, right, in getting the extra pieces that we need to understand if that's what's going on and how we need to fix it.
Yeah, I have heard of it's called like REDS CAT. So it's a clinical
Good test.
assessment tool. Yes, it's a clinical assessment tool for REDS that can be helpful as well. But like again, we need those trained professionals to help evaluate and make sure we are looking at all of the factors. But I think that is a helpful tool that I've heard some medical providers utilize. So just wanted to make mention of that, but also continuing to work with your medical providers to best understand and how to proceed.
Perfect. Yeah, because I think the sooner we realize that maybe something's off here, the sooner we can take the measures to reverse some of those negative consequences that may have come out of, and a lot of it's inadvertent underfueling, it sounds like, from these specific questions. So no shame in that game. We just need some help to figure out what we need and how we need to fix it, and get, like you said, that medical care team on board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, as this is the end of our final episode in this series, Lindsay, we talked all sorts of topics around disordered eating, but is there anything you would like to leave our listeners with around these topics, or more about you and where to find you, or any resources?
Yeah, I think a few of the things that I would love to share is just ultimately that an eating disorder is a brain-based illness. People are not choosing these disorders. I know there's a lot of stigma around eating disorders and other mental health illnesses, and we're trying to help, break that stigma. ultimately, I also want people to know that going through treatment alone can be extremely difficult, and it doesn't have to be. So really leaning into what we call as like a community of support. So those people who are close to you, as well as seeking treatment. It doesn't have to be this hard, and you can have an improved quality of life and a better relationship with food. I've worked with many individuals to get to that place. So I just want people to know it is possible, and to reach out to different centers to see if they would be a good fit for you. Yeah.
That's great. And we cannot thank you enough for being here to give your specific expertise and weighing in on some of these questions. I've actually been holding on to these questions for a little while, looking for someone to help because I felt like we needed more of an expert in your space. So I was very excited. Little background is Lindsay's brother is an assistant coach for my daughter's soccer team. So that's how we connected. And I'm just very thankful that we connected because, as you guys know, after listening to these 3 episodes, Lindsay is a huge resource and wonderful expert in this space, especially as a dietitian. So we're very happy to have you here. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. And just remind people where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can reach out to me. My website is Fulfilled Nutrition Counseling, and there's a multitude of different ways to contact me via email. You can give me a call. My phone number is there. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well under Fulfilled Nutrition Counseling. So don't be afraid to get connected. Always trying to share just helpful tips for people and individuals who may be going through recovery.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, guys.